How long does it take to recover from narcissistic abuse? This question comes up a lot in my experience with survivors of narcissistic abuse. And really, how can it not? If you're having to live under the auspices of grim, self-diminishing beliefs, which you had to adopt to survive the narcissistic abuse, then of course you're going to want to know how long until you can expect some relief. I engage with this question a lot as people are considering or beginning therapy to recover from this kind of abuse. And in today's video, I want to talk about the question. The short answer is that, at least in my own opinion, it depends. But I hope that what I discuss will be a little more satisfying than just that answer. My name's Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, specializing in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse. And you may be here to make sense of the abuse you suffered, and a great resource to help with this is my free ebook titled Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat. You can find it in the description box below or by clicking here. So narcissistic abuse can leave anyone who went through it feeling lost and estranged from their basic sense of who you are. In individual therapy and through my online course on recovery from narcissistic abuse, I try to offer a map that allows survivors to come back to the quality of life that they know they deserve. And of course, each survivor needs to travel this path themselves, but this sort of map can be useful in order to find one's way. And I think there are three essential features to this map that I call the three pillars to recovery. Pillar number one involves making sense of what happened. Pillar number two is gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser, whether it's psychological, emotional, even physical distance. And pillar number three involves living in defiance of the narcissist rules. And lastly, you can't do this in a vacuum. It's essential to find and participate in communities who can support you on this path. Today's video falls under pillar number one, making sense of what happened. I want to make clear that these answers are based on my own clinical, professional, and personal experience. So they may be thought of as sort of hypotheses about what could definitively answer this question, and these hypotheses could certainly benefit from actual research with survivors of narcissistic abuse to see if they are in fact correct. Well, with that being said, I believe that there are three factors which go into determining how long it takes to recover from narcissistic abuse. Factor number one, how early did the narcissistic abuse start? If you were born to a narcissistic parent, for example, and had the misfortune of having to forge your beliefs about who you are and what you can expect from others with someone who is so self-absorbed as the parent, then more time may be needed to recover. In contrast, if you had a good enough relationship with at least one caregiver where you felt protected, cared for, interested in, and basically loved, and the narcissistic abuse then occurred later in your life, then recovery may not take as long. And here's why. In the early stages of life, we're dependent on our primary caregivers to meet our psychological, physical, and emotional needs. So these can include being adequately fed, diapered, comforted, played with, and cared for. A young child is by nature self-centered, and in a healthy family gets to expect their parents to complement this self-centeredness with support, admiration, appreciation, and love. And by self-centered, I'm just being descriptive. That's exactly what a child, how they have to be oriented at this phase in life, because their self is not fully developed yet. So they're taking in the necessary ingredients they need to kind of feel full within themselves in order to then kind of feel relatively self-contained and have needs that can be met both within themselves and without. But at this phase in life, they're heavily dependent on others kind of showing them that they are important and they have needs that deserve to get met. So in this case, the family will delight in the child's own discovery of themselves and their world, and such a child may and likely will develop beliefs that others are available, generous, and appreciative in a fairly unconditional way, and that the child themselves is deserving of care, protection, and basically love. Now, let's say someone with this type of a childhood is now in, say, their 20s and finds a romantic partner who is initially devoted, charismatic, admiring, admirable, and seemingly everything that the person hoped for. Well, as time wears on, the partner maybe seems to grow bored and subtly starts to express disdain towards our subject here. the partner's derision only increases, and our subject initially works very hard to restore the relationship to its initial bliss, then begins to suffer flagging self-worth from feeling unable to do so because the partner is so kind of consistently unhappy with them. Well, after, in this example, let's say they reconnect with some longtime friends and family members and share with them what's going on in a relationship, then our subject may realize that it's really not them, but the partner who is the problem. Our subject might see that their partner is treating them in ways that are at odds with the fundamental beliefs they have about who they are, how they should be treated, and what they deserve in life and in relationships. So this person might break up with their narcissistic partner in short order and recover from its effects relatively quickly. In this example, the person had the fortune of forging self-worth enhancing fundamental beliefs about themselves and others in the early parts of their lives. When their partner started to reveal their narcissistic ways, these ways conflicted with the person's beliefs about themselves. And that conflict is what allowed the person in this example to identify what was happening after reconnecting with their friends and family and know and act as though they deserved better. In contrast, someone who forged beliefs about themselves and others with a narcissistic parent in the beginnings of life had the misfortune of learning that their needs are less important than the narcissistic parents, that they are undeserving of the care and attention they so badly want, and that there's something wrong with them that makes them unlovable. Now, when this same person is in, say, their 20s and falls into the same situation as I described earlier, the experience could be quite different. The initial way the narcissistic partner may have sort of fawned over our subject will have felt strange and unfamiliar, while the ensuing criticism and derision and devaluation will feel much more familiar. So our subject in this example now does not have a conflict with how the narcissistic partner is mistreating them in the way that the person in the earlier example did. And when there is less conflict between how a current narcissistic person in one's life mistreats you, then that can indicate a longer time required to recover from narcissistic abuse. The beliefs that were developed early in life with a narcissistic parent have to be identified and challenged so that the mistreatment in one's current life grows to feel like something that is unwarranted rather than expected. And I would say that if you find yourself in this boat, then long-term therapy is an important option to consider. It's the participation in new, safe relationships that I think is the most critical ingredient to recovery from narcissistic abuse. So a good ongoing therapy can help the survivor reprogram the beliefs that have been held to date and work out new beliefs that enhance rather than diminish the survivor's quality of life. The second factor, did anyone protect you from the narcissistic abuse? If you were born into a family with a narcissistic parent whose authority went unquestioned in the family, then you may have had to adopt beliefs about your own unworthiness and the narcissistic parent's superiority in a sort of a more intense way. And as a result, recovery can take longer. You know, often a narcissistic parent will choose a spouse who enables their needs to be admired, in control at all times, and entitled. So this type of spouse may be prone to idealing others and possess low self-worth themselves. And here I'm talking about the family role of the enabler parent, which I've gone into great depth in a different video, which you can find here, and I'll also put a link in the description box below. And if you had a narcissistic parent and the other parent was an enabler, then you missed out on having another adult around to appeal to for protection and also to model healthy disagreement with the narcissistic parent's demands. Instead, you may have had to conclude that the narcissistic parent is to be taken seriously no matter how self-absorbed and abusively they act towards you and others. The family's job in such tragic circumstances is often to prevent the narcissistic parent's behavior from getting exposed to the wider community. So to seek protection from outside the family can feel like leaving the only reality the child knows, and that is basically impossible for the child to do. But if you benefited from having another adult in your life who saw your narcissistic parent for who they were and offered you a trustworthy connection, then you may benefit from a shorter time required to recovery from narcissistic abuse. In such cases, you got to experience a frame of reference that felt legitimate, yet didn't require you to compromise yourself in the way that the narcissistic parent required. And you may have even got to express your disillusionment at the narcissistic parent to this other adult, or hear them express theirs. And all of this can be extremely useful to the eventual process of recovery. I mentioned this before, but there's a quote from a guy named Robert Stollerow, who's a prominent psychoanalyst, who basically says that bad things happening to a child don't cause ongoing psychological suffering. It's the absence of having anyone to tell about the bad things that can turn sort of just pain into this kind of ongoing suffering. And that's in essence what I'm talking about with this factor, about how long it takes to recover. If you had someone who stood up to the narcissist and listened to what it was like for you, then the process of recovery will feel somewhat familiar. If you never had this, then recovery can take longer to disembed the beliefs that you didn't deserve more than you got and create new beliefs that insist on your deservedness, with someone else in recovery. That again, in essence, you're being witnessed for the first time if you never had this, whereas if you did have such protection, then the experience of being witnessed and validated will feel at least somewhat familiar. And the third and final factor is how long did the narcissistic abuse last? The duration of the narcissistic abuse you survived can impact how much your system, I'm talking like nervous system and sort of like even brain development, how long that system had to accommodate to such mistreatment. So a child who had to be vigilant of and prepared for his narcissistic father's outburst of rage at the slightest show of disrespect may understandably have a nervous system wired for ongoing threat. At a very fundamental level of experience, living can feel like being under siege when this has been the reality from the start of life and say through adolescence. In contrast, someone who had a safe enough environment as a young child will have the benefit of experiencing a time in life when being narcissistically abused was not the reality. And so therefore their nervous systems may have different ways of regulating than to expect sort of constant threat. And threat of attack, threat of abandonment, threat of neglect. So in essence, I want to submit to you that it's the combination of these three factors that can determine how long it takes to recover from narcissistic abuse. And whatever your formula is with these factors, I want to emphasize that one of the most important parts to recovery is patience and compassion with yourself, no matter where you are and how reachable or not the quality of living you're seeking feels in that moment. And because what I have found is that persistence pays off in this process, so long as you're moving towards relationships with others who are safer people than the person who is narcissistically abusive. Well, I hope you found today's video useful along, around this, I think, common and important question. And I'd invite you to submit your, own experience to the degree you feel safe in the comments below, and to share your own lessons in your process of recovery along these lines. And again, the community that's always shows itself around these videos is always, incredibly heartening and rewarding. I want to thank everyone for your continued support and engagement with this channel and with these videos. And I'll see you all next Friday with a new video at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Take care.